you want.
Excellent. Okay, we're now recording.
Okay.
Okay. Wait, I'm gonna put on another lip gloss because that's what it's gonna distract me. I'm gonna wipe the oil off my face. I just exfoliated the shit out of my face this morning. You know, I wanted to look ready. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay.
Want to start or should I start?
You start.
Ready, go.
I was stitching my side. Oh my God, I'm laughing. Oh my God. Okay. All right. I'll start. I'll go. I'll start. I'll say it. Okay. All right. So, I'm so glad that you are here today. So I'll start first. My name is Ann Conkley. I am a certified nurse midwife and a certified coach. And I am so glad to be here with you, Amanda, talking about all sorts of things today. I have a list of questions for you, and I know you have some for me, and to have a conversation. We've talked in the past, and it was totally enlightening to hear about where you started, and I thought it was fascinating to hear about your business. So I'm excited to hear more. A little bit about me. I live in Cleveland. I have 2 boys, and today is super exciting because it's the last day of school. So we're celebrating that we made it through virtual school. And I founded a business called Authentic Coaching, where I do life coaching for women. And then I have a segment specific for APRNs who are going through personal and professional growth and trying to find those first jobs. And I love that work. So that's about me. I would love to hear, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Guarniere. I'm also an advanced practice nurse. I've been an NP since 2011, and I live outside of New York City with my husband and 3 little girls. And clinically, I've worked for a while in emergency medicine as an emergency NP. And for the past couple of years, I started a business called the ResumeRx, and I serve nurses and nurse practitioners specifically with career mentorship and coaching. So that, my ultimate goal is that all nursing professionals can kind of start and grow a career that leaves them both professionally fulfilled and personally fulfilled. So, Anne, I feel like that's where you and I really are kind of kindred spirits, in that we really value not just the professional growth for NPs and APRNs, but the personal growth as well. Because some things that I notice is that sometimes, and I hope we can talk about this a little bit more, sometimes after you go through all that schooling to become an APRN or even just an RN, after you devote yourself to this career and that career starts, what about the personal side? Like, what type of personal struggles are women going through specifically? And I feel like there are a lot that we could kind of talk about. So I feel like we both work really hard to make sure that nursing professionals are working towards those career goals, but also being mindful of how those career goals will affect their personal lives. And I think we both have kind of a story to tell about our own personal life that kind of inspires the work that we do. So hopefully we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's funny because I don't think I ever got into the nursing profession and thought I would go through things like burnout. And I don't think I ever knew that I would not only go through burnout once, but twice, like 2 episodes of burnout. And it's funny. I mean, I always knew there was a certain level of, like, we talked a lot about leadership and leadership programs and stuff as opportunities for, professional advancement or for like honing some of those skills that, that the longer that you're in the practice, the more often you get handed in terms of projects and maybe opportunity. And so I think there's always been this like talk about leadership, but I don't think I ever got into the profession thinking I was going to have to personally grow so much and that I would get to a point where I felt like I was doing all the other work, like seeing the patients, doing the labs, helping to do some of the management pieces at, and that was happening at the expense of and doing some of the leadership courses, but that was happening at the expense of the personal side.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think I knew that was a part of, what the experience would be for me. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes that's a reason that I do some of the work that I do now. I mean, it really, um, I feel like I wish I had a program or some sort of opportunity to, I don't want to say network, but just have that support. And I don't know that I had it. And it's not to say I didn't have was in a big group of midwives with my last practice, and they were excellent. I mean, I had a great group. I still have some very close contacts and really good friends that came out of that group. But like the first practice I was in, I was on my own. I was the only midwife there, and there was one other NP, and I didn't see her very often. And there was a PA, and then there was this big group of docs, and they were great. Um, in many ways, they taught me so much, and I still feel like I didn't have that community and that
Yeah.
supportive side, to like
Yeah.
help with that professional, or like that personal kind of growth that just comes with the territory of, as we get more, complex patients and we really kind of hone our skill, like we like need to, just as like you up your skill, you need to like up your personal skills,
For sure. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I feel like, as a profession, we do a pretty good job of creating, competent clinicians who are ready to step into those roles. Um, but I feel like maybe we lack with giving the appropriate like anticipatory guidance for what you should expect in that transition to practice, like going from graduation to your first job in your first few years. I don't know about you, but that's where I see specifically APRNs struggling the most is, they get through school, they finally get through school, getting a job can be really tough. And part of that is finding the right job because they don't necessarily know what they're going to need in that first few years. And it's really hard to have that foresight when all your education and schooling has just been focused on, passing your courses, passing your boards. And then it's just like, oh yeah, and go get a job. And I feel like, there's so much more room in our profession to nurture new APRNs. But there's not like a go-to place for that or a go-to person or a go-to community. And professional memberships and organizations are great, but even like the mentorship programs that they try to offer are not serving new APRNs in the way that they need or want to be served. And part of that is, as a new APRN, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you need. You don't know what you're going to need in terms of not only clinical support, but also, mindset support and kind of transitioning to that like role identity of being a professional APRN, and also all the other personal things that happen too. Because this doesn't all happen like in silos. Your professional and your personal life are so intertwined. And I really feel like there's a gap there um, that you and I are both trying to serve in
Yeah.
one way or another.
Yeah, and it's funny. Even as you were saying it, I was just. It reminds me. I was having a conversation with a colleague and a couple of clients about how COVID feels like the postpartum period. Like going through, and we're in roughly the 10 weeks into this coronavirus and COVID-19, and I feel like there's been this just upheaval of, it's like just so much, was so much change all at once. And
Yeah.
ignorance is bliss. If somebody told you a year ago you'd be in the midst of a pandemic, and how would you respond? You'd have no idea, because you just don't know.
Right.
And so I've likened this like journey of going through COVID as it was like the postpartum experience. You're just like trying to figure out, you don't have a ton of information. You kind of go with your gut. You do what other people do. You kind of take a little bit of what, your mother tells you, or, the people you trust, and then you go from there. And I think when you were talking, I was thinking about how it's a similar story, I think, with advanced practice nurses, which is that to like labor and birth and parenting, which is like for labor, for, like prenatal care, what do we focus on? Well, we focus on like healthy mom, healthy fetus, and then we focus on birth,
Yep.
and that's it. And
That's it.
maybe we talk a little bit about breastfeeding, and we talk, a lot of support, and like if you're lucky enough to be in a place that does a group prenatal care program like Centering Pregnancy, you might get additional benefit of like more information. But we like you said, we focus on passing boards, get your, graduate, get your certification, pass your boards, and then you're like, what?
Yeah, wow,
You
that's such a powerful analogy. And, having gone through that a couple times, I completely agree with you. Like, so much attention and so many boxes that get checked off in that prenatal period. And then, there's the birth event. And then, my gosh, you're pretty much on your own after that.
Yeah,
And even, even with the new ACOG guidelines that are trying to, redefine the postpartum care. I don't know about you, but that's not happening in my practice. I gave birth, 9 months ago, and I got that 1 6-week visit, never another phone call, nothing.
that was that.
And yeah, and I didn't know what was available to me in terms of resources. I didn't know, even as, not a first time mom, I didn't know, when is appropriate for me to be asking for help about things. And it wasn't until I went to that 6-week appointment and that the midwife said to me, Amanda, you need to hire some help. If you can, get a babysitter. You don't have anyone helping you. Your husband's working full time and you're home with 3-year-old twins and a newborn. Like, you need some help. I was like, yeah, you're right. And I needed to be
Valid.
like given that permission and validated. And so much of healthcare, first of all, is validating. So much of how we connect with other people is validating experiences. Like, that alone is so healing that I feel like, a lot of the questions that I see from new APRNs are just situations that need validation. And it's not necessarily you have a question and I have an answer, but, what you're feeling is okay. And kind of this coaching of how can you figure this next step out on your own, like given permission to
Yeah.
be comfortable in your own decisions, um, is something that's really difficult when you're in that first year transition mindset of, feeling like a novice and feeling like you don't even have
Yeah.
permission to make the decision.
Yeah. And I think too, it's that, I find even, I mean, I was just thinking about even a conversation I had this week with a client of mine about, she's in a certain situation in work. And she's like, I think that this feels like it isn't beneficial to, the practice of midwifery. And I was like, yeah, I think you're right, and after that, we talked through it. It was a situation, and we kind of explored it, and we, talked through it, and I gave her a little bit of coaching and a little bit of mentorship based on the fact that, I've been in a similar situation, and have seen colleagues go through it. And it was so interesting because the relief was palpable, to
Mm,
have a trusted resource to go to have someone who, where you could say, where you knew the response would be honest, and it would come with grace, and it would come with that allowing, giving permission, to hold the space for the conversation and the feels and all of it. And that's just not, if you don't, like, so many people don't have that.
yeah.
And I don't know if you had that, even whether it was as a parent, a new parent, or at a postpartum visit, or if it was like, in your first experience of being, in one of your first roles. But that was not something that I had,
No,
um, and that doesn't seem right.
I know. I try to think about other professions. Like, is this something that's unique to ours? Are other professions doing this better? I try to think, do physicians have a better way of handling this? Do they have kind of inner circle mentorship, formal or informal, that, helps them thrive? Or is this something that, happens in a lot of different professions and we're just kind of identifying our own unique version of it? And I don't know the answer to that. If there was another profession that was doing this exceptionally well, especially, if it was a healthcare provider role, then, I'd be trying to see what they're doing, to help. But, I feel like I don't hear as much about burnout and tough practice transitions as I do about our profession. And I'm not sure why that is.
I,
Um,
I agree. I don't know either. I would say this, an article came out in that I use I do some speaking for the Ohio Nurses Association, and we talked about burnout and a couple of, practice related issues, safety and that kind of thing. But one study that I have, I think it's by Casharo, and it's from maybe 2019, but it was interesting in that it's a mostly focuses on physicians, but the burnout rate is something like, when surveyed, 67% of physicians, and the sample size wasn't huge. I think it was a couple thousand. But it's interesting because if you look at the broader rates of burnout, and when I think about burnout and I think about burnout syndrome and all the things that come with it, the chest palpitations and the stress and the waking up at the 3 a.m., like I can't go back, like this is terrible. And then knowing full well that there's good research and data to support that, when I feel that way, I don't give the best patient care. And
right.
then that's when we start to see that some of the outcomes aren't as good. And so, it's this like whole trickle effect, right? But I think if you kind of extrapolate from that data and say, well, if the levels of burnout, at least if it's been surveyed in physicians, is at 2/3, which is crazy that
Yeah.
thirds report some type of burnout symptoms, then I don't think, I don't know if this is an issue that is singular to our profession. I don't think it is. And I think it's a bigger, broader conversation about like healthcare and where so many of us are like treading water, trying to stay afloat
Right.
system that just doesn't support us in the way that it could,
Mm-hmm.
and the way I think that we need.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think I don't think it's an issue of our profession. I think there's some things that probably contribute to it being different in our profession and maybe a little bit worse.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the unhealthy behaviors that I
Yeah.
think are more prevalent in the nursing culture.
Yeah.
Um, and it's there. It's definitely there.
So here's a question for you. What do you think would be a good preventive care prescription
Yeah.
for burnout?
I know
If someone is listening or watching us and they're not there, but they're worried about getting there, like what can we do in advance to prevent that cascade?
Yeah. And this is an interesting one because I think like everyone will tell you the initial response will always be self-care, which I think is really like a terrible band-aid to put on this problem.
Sure.
It's not, I don't, in my opinion, and I talk a lot about self-care, whether it's with coaching or whether it's on Instagram. I mean, I do a lot of self-care, and that is just a very targeted, it feels to me like telling nurses to do more self-care, and whether it's nurses or parents or moms or whatever, it's just putting the onus on them to fix
Mm-hmm.
to fix it within themselves, and it
Yeah.
doesn't look at the bigger, broader system issue of the reasons that providers, APPs or APRNs or physicians feel burnout. It's kind of this like, it's like a hypertension med. Like you have hypertension. Here's your, hydrochlorothiazide. Okay, great. Okay, but we just failed to discuss all the other factors that can, make your hypertension worse, or that,
Sure.
other non medical management, interventions for your hypertension. And so so self-care is a part of the conversation that we have about burnout, and really, making sure that we care for ourselves and tend to ourselves in the ways in which we need. And that varies by individual. So that's a part of it. But the larger concern is really, do you have engagement at work? Are you in alignment? I talk a lot with my clients about alignment and finding, not only working for an employer and an organization that supports you in terms of its mission, right? You have alignment. Your mission is also similar to the mission of the organization for which you work. That's a huge piece of it, in my opinion, because the reality is if I'm working for somebody and they don't share my values about time management, time freedom, family, the importance of family, social justice, whatever it is, it will just be constant,
Yeah.
like consternation,
Sure.
um, and so I think a portion of it is self-care. A portion of it is having that alignment, and alignment comes with needing clarity. Like this, I mean, these are the conversations we get, and I get into a lot with coaching clients, which I'm sure you do too, which is like, well, what do you want? Right? Like we always, we tend, I think, to go for the job that seems like the expectation of what we should want, or
Mm-hmm.
the practice that like will get us the best dollar, or it will, it'll, not necessarily from a place of saying, well, these are my values, this is what I need to feel human, whole, really like I'm growing. Um, and then like we don't usually do it that way, right? And
Right.
then
Yeah.
I take what I have in my, what's important to me, and I align it with, the organization that I'm trying to work for. So it just, and you wonder, like, if we supported individuals in the way that they could be supported, especially healthcare providers, I don't know, maybe we wouldn't have as much burnout,
I know.
we wouldn't have to tell people to do self-care and stuff.
Right. But I also feel like to some extent, like being able to go about the decision that way is such a privilege. Um,
Yes.
like some people are just like, well, that's all fine and good, Amanda, but I need a job. I need to, feed my kids. I need to pay my rent or pay my mortgage or whatever it is. And, I struggle with that too. And because, you know, through rose colored glasses, I can say, okay, well, make sure that you are really interviewing the employer, make sure that their mission is aligned with yours, and, think about your ideal day and, your ideal career and what that looks like. But, I also have to remember that, having the ability to take the time and not potentially not be employed or be underemployed until finding that right fit is such a privilege, and really comes from a place of privilege. So, there's that conversation too about, sometimes you need to take, sometimes people feel like they need to take what they can get because it's a means to an end of employment, and
Yeah.
then they can like give themselves the space to think about that. So, I try to remember that too, because sometimes I like to describe it like stepping stones, you
Yes.
know, finding maybe not the ideal job, but a job that does pay the bills and it's with an employer that you feel aligned with. You start the job there, you work for a little bit, you can then try to move as an internal candidate to that more, ideal, perfect fit job that fits into your lifestyle. So um, there are just so many different factors. I agree with you that can kind of contribute to, well, I'm burnt out because this is just what I had to do.
Yeah.
Uh, and I like what you said about not just, having the prescription be self-care, because it places some blame. It says that, the reason why you're burnt out is because you didn't do this. And that's not fair to
Yes.
the nurses. And yeah, it's just not the statement that makes uh, places blame, whether it's intended to or not.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's totally, I think you're absolutely right. It is a privilege to not, right, to look and hunt and find what's totally right. And yes, I mean, if, there's no question that if you're in a place of needing a job and you need, you need money to pay your bills, you need money to, feed your kids, like, yeah, you've got to take a job. And you may be more selective in terms of, or you may not be as selective or as choosy about what comes through. However, I think what the important piece that you talked about was, which is mindset, which is this idea of, look, I can go, I mean, I used to, one of my old boss, we used to joke about this all the time. I can do anything for 8 hours, it's like when you get into like preparing your mindset for shift, when you're like, I'm going to go in, I know the floor is going to be crazy. This used to happen on L&D. I used to work Thursday nights on L&D and catch like a ton of babies. And I just have to go in there with this, like, it's going to be crazy. I can do anything for 12 hours. I'm going to psych myself up and get there. And then, I'm good. Right. And inevitably it would help me get into that good frame of mind and some pump up music, like getting it
Mhm.
going. And so I think the mindset piece of that is similar in terms of when you go to look for a job, which is that right, if we have the awareness to know that, yes, I am the type of person that values, because this is also a conversation that I think is maybe particular to some more than it is to others, right? Some people, just like you and I, are like have this entrepreneurial spirit. Not every nurse or APRN does, not every person does, and that's
Right.
okay. Right. Some people want to go to work and do a 9 to 5 and check in, check out, and boom, they're done. That's it. And that's totally fine. For those of us who want a little bit more, right? We want a little bit more freedom. Maybe we want a little bit more self-guided direction where we can, do the projects that we want to do, and we want to, sink our teeth into like this and just like own it and run it. And that's okay too. So the mindset piece, I think, is that if I go into this job saying, yeah, okay, I can do this job for 2 years. I'm going to commit to a year. I'm going to commit to 1 year. I'm going to commit to, like you said, being a stepping stone. This is the stone that I step onto now, knowing, making that next, right, that next decision. Um, so that it gets me to the next one.
Right.
Right. And so I think that mindset piece is huge, because when you lose that hope, right, it just like creates such despair, like I'm never going to get into, that position that I really want, or I'm going to drown here and, dunning, or like, checking off my labs,
Right. Right.
um, but no, you're right. It's a privilege to be able to sit and like, consider jobs based on location and your needs. And um, so can we use the aspect of mindset to say, okay, I'll go into any situation so that it gives me the experience, it gives me some cash flow, it gives me the opportunity to cover my basic needs. And then,
Right.
and what's the next step?
Yeah.
I build my skills so that I am ready for, the position that I really want in 2 years or something.
Right. Something that I noticed, so I haven't been working clinically over the past year because when we moved to this area, I was very pregnant. So I decided to, leave my job in the previous area, have the baby, and then start looking for a job, after a leisurely maternity leave. And long story short, I found and signed on for a job in January, and the credentialing took until April, and it was in an ER in New York City in the middle of April 2020, which you can imagine what was going on there. And long story short, I decided to defer that job. But so in the past year, I feel like I have finally gotten some breathing room in my life to even think about things like personal growth and mindset. Like I read books now and I take time for myself, which when I was working full time, even in a job, I've always, for the most part, worked a job where I go in, I do my shift and I leave because that was a really high priority for me. I didn't want to be taking work home physically or mentally. So I decided to move into a position where I could completely compartmentalize so that I could do what you said, psych myself up for my 12 and a half hour shift, go in, do my job. It was crazy. I'd do 3 12-hour nights in a row in the ER, and then I'd be off. And that was just what I needed to do to kind of stay sane as a full-time working mom. But I was pretty much just getting by in terms of my own well-being, and there was not really time for self-care. I couldn't, read or think about mindset activities or journal or do all these other things that I have now had the time to do. And so I have to wonder, I- it was just kind of survival mode at that point where I couldn't even think far ahead enough to say, well, what do I want this to be a stepping stone for?
Yeah.
If you had asked me, well, what's your next career ambition? Like it was just a blank, I was coming up with nothing, it was a thought
Yeah.
bubble and it was empty. Because I just couldn't think beyond like the next set of 3 shifts. And maybe that was a burnout sign for me. That was a point where I decided to make some changes. And, personally, I paid off my loans so that I worked like a dog to pay off my loans so that I didn't have to work as much anymore.
Great.
And that's where I finally got that space to breathe. Um, But that's something that I think about too, that, you know, so many people, especially if they're working parents as full-time RNs or APRNs, may not have that space to even think and dream about what their next move is.
Yeah.
So I want to have you experienced that?
Oh yeah, and I think this is that conversation of like, it's, surviving versus thriving. And yeah, I think when your basic needs, I mean, I can't, I, it's always an interesting conversation, I think, from people who have been in, especially nights, because I think there's a difference between, doing day shift or doing, only outpatient work for your 9 to 5 or, 8 to 6 or whatever, versus taking call or doing some sort of shift night work,
Mm-hmm.
right? That impairs or uh, that changes your how much sleep you get, right?
Mm,
And I always think it's interesting to have when I have conversations with clients or in general with colleagues about how if you have the opportunity to step away, and I'm not talking maternity leave because everybody knows maternity leave is like right? There's nothing restful about maternity leave. And if you have the opportunity to, and again, privileged to step away from that and to have, 3 months of like, or even a month of consistent sleep,
mm,
right? Like if you get the basic needs met, it's crazy that, I mean, the
mm-hmm.
space that it opens up and the, just the it's always so interesting. I think it's such a different perspective to come out of that. And I'll never forget when the first job that I took was all outpatient. We did like, I started off in the role. I was Monday through Friday, every other Saturday. I had half a day on Wednesdays for the days I worked on Saturday mornings. And, I knew I didn't want to do, outpatient only for, my career. I wanted to be full scope midwifery. However, that was the position that was available. So that's what I
Mm-hmm.
took. Right. And so eventually I got to the point where I was able to help, do some call, which was great. But I'll never forget, going from working shift work as a nurse, right? This is my first, midwife position. Went from shift work as a nurse and travel nursing within Chicago into this like very regular routine for about a year. And we didn't have kids. Like we were just moved back from Chicago to Cleveland. And I was like, oh my God, like is this what people do? Like they go to bed at the same time every night and then they wake up and they feel refreshed and they can go work out. And then they, it's so crazy. And then you get into, and then, and then all of a sudden we had our first child. And like I said, there's nothing
And then you never
restful.
slept again.
And then you never slept again, and then, I mean, it's just so funny because, and so I'm at a point where my kids are 10 and 7. And so they're sleeping through the night. And I am also sleeping through the night. And that's the craziest, best intervention that probably any of us, I think, can give to ourselves. I mean, so you're right. I think when there's just, you know, I don't know, and maybe this isn't a shared, feeling amongst all advanced practice nurses, but I would say if you have the opportunity to not work, I am curious about the experience of going from that shift work, especially working nights and days, back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
and then going to this like consistent routine where I'm curious to know about like the difference in feelings. My own personal experience was that it was earth shattering,
Mm-hmm.
literally, you know?
Yeah, anecdotally, like the couple, probably handful of APRNs who I've known, who I knew in my previous position, who worked nights and then transitioned off of nights, either because they took a different job, because frankly, in the ER, it's rare to find a position where you're not forced to do either shift rotating or straight nights. But I remember this one NP who, I think I actually took her vacancy. Like I took her night's vacancy. She took another job as a hospitalist at neighboring um, a neighboring hospital, and she stayed on per diem but only did days. So sometimes I would sign out to her on like a Saturday morning or something when I had just worked the night. And she was like, Amanda, you will never believe the difference. She's like, it took about a week or two, but now I finally feel alive again. I was like, wow, that's a powerful thing to say. But you know what? I totally agree. And granted, I did my transition off of nights when I was about 6 months pregnant. So then I had like those other things impacting my,
Right.
comfort and sleeping through the night. But still, like when I was on nights, my moods were awful.
Mm.
Especially like after, because I would work when I did part-time, I would work 2 nights and then I'd come home, I'd get home at 8, I'd eat breakfast, I'd go to bed. And in order to flip back to a day like schedule, I would get up between 2 and 3. So I'd really only get from like 9 to 2-ish on
Yep.
that final night. And that rest of the day, I couldn't drive anywhere. I could hardly prepare dinner. I was a very not friendly mother.
Yep.
My fuse was so short. I almost picked a fight with my husband,
Mm-hmm.
like a
Yeah.
fight that did not need to be picked. um, and I just have to like check myself and remember that it was a post nights situation. I felt physically hungover, like headache, sick to my stomach, like just so foggy. That yeah, I really but it was the only solution that could allow me to keep my sanity otherwise working as a working parent. Like it was the only thing that diffused the guilt of returning to work as a mom with young kids at home, because I knew that while I was working, my kids were sleeping. And it was the only thing that got me through that shift where my mind could be completely focused on the task at hand. And it really needed to be in the setting that I worked in. And in any setting, you need to be focused on the task at hand. But the only thing that kept me from kind of going nuts on a shift was knowing that my kids were safely home in their bed, not missing me because they were asleep.
Yeah. My mom was a nurse. My mom is a nurse, and we have like a ton of nurses in our family. And she always used to say that she would work. Her mom was a nurse, and her mom would go to work at work PMs, and so and a mix of PMs and nights. And so my mom did the same. And my mom used to say the same thing. She's like, I always felt like at least I knew you guys were taken care of, and your grandparents would put you to bed, and and you wouldn't really know that I was gone. And she
Yeah.
did that for years. And I did that too as a new, I mean, I've worked nights for 15 years, whether it's been as a registered nurse or a midwife, and up until a year ago when I left my clinical practice. And it is crazy. I had a big realization probably, I bet it was, I don't know, maybe at this point, 5 or 6 years ago. I did this leadership program. It was really interesting. And I'll never forget sitting there. And I had this realization that I was in the midst of going through some stuff. Like I'd been through, this really horrendous shoulder dystocia that ended up fine for mom and baby, but I was like left with just a lot of trauma and guilt
Mm.
and just, that whole the fear of it happening again and all this. And I went through that. I was going through a lot of thyroid stuff. Like, it's like the perfect storm for like
Mm.
thyroiditis, and my kids were little. I was, I think my littlest one was, I don't know, 3 or 4. And my littlest one was a newborn. And like, I just remember thinking, I was, like I would do something like similar. Like I would just, whether it was me picking a fight or being just like annoyed or
Mhm.
just so tired at the end of the night that I just couldn't, finish the job, whether it was doing the dishes and I'd just be like, oh, or washing bottles in pump
Mhm.
parts. Oh, like even that I get angst, like just thinking about washing pump parts, but I remember sitting in this leadership class and just thinking, like, I'm giving my best. I'm so tired and I value the work that I do. And I remember thinking, I'm giving my best to my patients, which they deserve. They deserve it, right? They deserve my best, and they don't deserve it at the expense of my family.
Yeah.
And I will never forget being like, oh, what am I doing? Like, I'm so backwards. And that was a big moment for me where I just thought, I need to figure out a different path because this does not serve me, and it does not serve the people who are important to me, my family, my children, what I mean, and I know parents raise kids in all sorts of situations, and under so many constraints that are way worse than what I have. I have a loving, supportive spouse, and a great partner in, rearing children. And like, not everybody has that. And I was still like, I couldn't get over that sense of thinking, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. I'm totally backwards.
It's
That was like a huge pivot moment for me, because I thought, I got to fix this. Like, it's not good.
It's funny that you say that because, sometimes we go through experiences and if we don't have a big enough support network, we feel like we're the only ones who go through that experience. But, I remember my turning point, whatever my aha moment that I needed to change what I was doing was after I had gone back to work after the twins. And I think I had gone to nights already. I don't remember, but I remember feeling at work so resentful
Mm.
because, you know, first of all, emergency medicine, not the most gracious job. You do,
Yeah. Oh, it's not.
you do really important work most of the time. But patients aren't, it's the worst day of their life and they get a pass for this, but you don't get a lot of appreciation from the patients. And, sometimes you get belligerence, which is a whole other story. But I remember going to work and feeling like I was leaving the people that I cared for the most in order to care for people who didn't give a crap about what I was doing for them. And that was like my pre-burnout sign when
Yeah.
I was having like, because it wasn't just compassion fatigue at that point, like it was compassion resentment. Like
Yeah.
I'm here giving of myself for 12 and a half hours to strangers. Um, and like you said, at the expense of my family. And whether it really was at the expense of my family, I'm not really sure, because I'd like to think that when I was present with my family, like I was the best parent that I needed to be. But it was, the fact that they were with my in-house babysitter while I was sleeping. And I created that scenario for me to feel better about the fact that I was working, and the fact that it was cheaper to have a nanny than two infants in daycare. Um, but like, I don't know, I just felt so resentful and jealous of my nanny for getting to spend all that time with my kids during the day while I slept, so that while my kids were sleeping, I went out to care for people who didn't who I didn't feel appreciated the work that I did. Um, and that may or may not have been true, right? Like the work that I was doing was important,
Yes.
but how I felt about it
Yeah.
affected how I was able to perform and provide care.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a really difficult realization to come to, because if you would have asked me when I was in NP school before I was even married or had children, I would have said, oh gosh, I'm going to be full-time working mom until I can't do it anymore, because I was so career focused and so career driven and had such large career goals that I just figured that my personal life and my family life would, you know, fit into that somewhere.
Yeah.
But what I realized, and what
Yeah.
I didn't expect to realize, is that for me, it's the exact opposite. I need to create my preferred life, personal life, and then have my career fit into it, at least for right now. Um, and that right now has been, 4 years so far, since I became a mom. And maybe that will change. Maybe it won't. I don't know, but that's how it is right now. And so that's what I've been trying to, admit to myself and then do all the other parts so that I can feel, like you said, in alignment with that, that decision.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, because I don't think we're alone, whether it's in our profession or in general as working moms, where and this is a conversation I think too, that for me is flavored or peppered by, I just read Ada Calhoun's Why We Can't Sleep, which is a really, it talks about midlife crisis for women, and a lot about the millennial Gen X kind of difference or the difference between like boomers and Gen Xers and
Mm-hmm.
millennials and how the Gen Xers are, and I'm right on the cusp of Gen X and millennial about how, there's just this, like, the boomers made so many of these paths forward, like bulldozed a lot of things for the Gen Xers. And now it's like, well, you can have it all. And the question is, I think there are many of us who get to the point, and this is my personal opinion, where I felt like, I don't know if I want all that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
At that expense, right? At that cost, because it's always a cost benefit ratio.
Mm-hmm.
It
Sure.
always is like, and one of the, I love Lizzo in general, and I love her phrase, like, is it just worth the squeeze on that? Because it's always this, it's kind of a great way to ask yourself, like, is it
Yeah.
really worth it for me to be tired and not, feel like I'm fully present with my kids? And then it manifests in anger and frustration, and fatigue just is so detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
And then that whole guilt piece, because you can't have this conversation too without talking about the fact that it's just really hard for working parents in general. And I mean, if
Yeah.
anything, COVID has done anything to show, like, remind me of that. And I hope it,
Absolutely.
right, is like a good reminder to the world of all of the, you know, the difficulties of being present, being parents who are, I don't know, like, I hate to say, like, enriching and like, good. I just mean to say, it's just the difficulties of raising children and working and trying to find the harmony and it's like, it's crazy.
Yeah. There's always, it feels like there's always more work to be done.
Oh,
You know,
all the
like
time.
it's never just checking boxes, like you said, once the basic needs are met, when it comes to parenting, there's always more to do or more to be done or more to be improved upon. Um, and and I want to be able to have that space in my life to think about those things and make those decisions, because that's what's important to me. Um, but yeah, yeah, no, the current situation has definitely kind of casted some light on that who knows if things will change, um, moving forward. But I think that, realizing the challenges that working parents go through, that maybe that I feel like we all know,
Yeah.
anyone who has worked and also been a parent knows these things, for the most part, unless you are incredibly privileged, in which case you probably don't need to be working and you can, hire the help to help you navigate those types of things. But um, it's conversations that just don't happen, probably because people are too busy working and raising their kids to sit down and have the conversations.
Like, think about it. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Although I think we're having more of them. It's just, it's that whole piece of, when does conversation, how does it turn into, policy change, and how does it
Sure.
turn into, making sure that, people don't only see it and feel it, but they, there's some, we make some actions and forward progress on it. And I don't, and I think too, if anything, the fact, I mean, we're, like I said, today we're celebrating because today is the last day of school, and I feel like we made it. I feel like I had I had a short, like, little comment in the New York Times that came out about a year ago. And it was just one of those, like, I get their weekly emails that come in, living well and parenting and stuff. And I love
Hmm.
them. And so they had put at the bottom, like, share your, one of your, successes of being like a working parent. And I was like, I was so excited when our kids, my youngest got on the school bus to go to elementary school with my oldest. They went to the same school, and, it's public school. And I was like, wow, this is like, we made it. We made it out of daycare. We made it out of diapers. We made it out of the whole thing. And oh my gosh, we're still here. We totally made it. And I feel like today is another one of those days of, like, we made it. And I,
Mm.
because there are so many working parents who aren't like me and have the luxury of being able to get up 3 hours early and do work on my business and then do 3 hours of virtual schooling and sit with them hand holding and helping them get the assignments done and doing the portion that the teachers have done.
Right.
And, I know that there are people who don't have that luxury. But like, I just feel like it's another one of those where like, oh, it didn't break us, and I hope that's not the end of the conversation.
Right.
Like, oh, you made it. It must have been fine. You're just,
Right.
you like, you did it. I hope we have bigger, broader conversation about like, it's not sustainable. It's
Right.
not.
Yeah.
I want to hear too, just, I know we're probably getting to the end here, but I would love to hear too, just about, ResumeRx. I want like again, how did it come about? Because I think too, I think for people who are probably listening to this, that they're, maybe working parents, working moms, APRN moms, and knowing some of the changes we've gone through with staffing and the changes in terms of people being furloughed and laid off, like, how did you start this and how did it happen?
Yeah. So it's a good transition from my story of, going back to work as a mom of young kids. And I was searching for something to allow me to stay home more. And I also was searching for the opportunity to, maybe be my own boss a little. I never really was an entrepreneurial type of person. Like that wasn't really in my vocabulary as a kid. I didn't have a lemonade stand or, sell sell things to anybody. But, I was searching for that opportunity where I could, directly influence like the money coming into my household by something that I could create and do. Um, so I was in a Facebook group. I was just browsing my Facebook feed or whatever, and I'm in a bunch of nurse practitioner APRN Facebook groups, and something popped up. Someone was asking for advice about their resume, saying, "Hey, can anyone post a picture of theirs, or how did you lay it out?" Or, now that there are now tons of those types of requests that I had just never really seen before. And so I was like, oh, I'll just post a picture of mine. I have a nice resume. I worked on it. I find myself, talented in that department. Like I know what looks good and I know how to write. So I posted a picture and it got like a lot of great responses. Oh, wow. Can you send that to me? Blah, blah, blah. So I didn't think too much of it until I kept seeing these same requests. Hey, can someone recommend a resume writer? Can someone, what should I do for my resume or CV? And asking all these questions. I was like, oh, this really seems like it's a pain point for people,
Mhm.
which pain point probably wasn't in my vocabulary either because I had really no business acumen or any sort of business training, to be completely honest. And I, said to myself, well, this feels like a gap maybe I could try to fill. So I first I wanted to validate my idea. Like, would someone pay me money to do this? So I did 2 or 3 complimentary resume rewrites for friends of mine, nurse friends of mine. And then created like this very small portfolio of testimonials and examples and posted back in that same Facebook group that I was, available to do this. I was starting a business and, for a discounted rate of, I think my first price was, I don't know, $100, $125.
Mhm.
I would rewrite and redesign your resume for you. And I got a ton of responses. So that ended up being kind of my first block of clients. And so I used that revenue to kind of self-fund getting my business started. So I started a website, and as I went and redesigned, I created kind of templates of the designs I was creating. And then eventually I put those up for sale on my website, which nobody really knew about, but I hoped that someday I would kind of like get them out there into the world. And so long story short, that first year of business was me doing a lot of custom resume writing. I gradually increased my prices every few months. And then I had this, resume template shop that I hoped people would find in the background. And they did. And, in the past couple of years, I've sold several thousand resume templates. And I've had now several hundred custom resume clients. And what I did was I grew the business, after the first year or so. I said, this is great. I love writing resumes for other people, but what I really like more, because I also started a social media presence, I really like teaching people
Mhm.
not only how to write their resume, but why it's important, and also the other very important things, because it's not just all about your resume. I don't want, in hindsight, I probably named my business wrong, because, I kind of get labeled as the nurse resume person, which is great. Like, your resume is really important, but it's not everything. So, my brand has kind of evolved into being more of an education type platform for nursing professionals to learn not just how to write a resume and cover letter, but also how to navigate the job search and negotiating and kind of all that professional stuff that nobody learns in school.
Yep.
So now I still have a portion of my business that's the custom resume writing. That's now like the kind of premium, most expensive thing. But I also have some online tutorial courses that teach people how to write their own resume. I have a course that teaches people kind of how to go from commencement to contract when finding
Love that.
a job, and that's specifically for NPs.
Mhm.
And then my templates are kind of the entry point that most people find me. And so, yeah,
I
that's
love them. I
story.
love the templates. I think they're awesome. I like the um I love your website. I think it's
Thank you.
beautiful, and I love, I always chuckle because I get so many of your ads popping up into my feed, and I'm like, there she is. Hey, Amanda. I love it, but I think it's great because it's a good reminder to me, like, I could be, there are ways to increase our visibility, as business owners, and you're doing a fabulous, fantastic job of it. So,
Thank you.
and I love that. And I know I told you about too, the Doximity, the video that came across on Doximity, I think, about like interview tips and skills. Maybe I thought it
Yeah.
was, but I love it. It's like, you're right. It's
Thanks.
just that commencement to contract it's hairy, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So pain points, you found a pain point or an issue that people were having. You're like, I
Hmm.
can do something about that.
Yeah.
And you did, which
Yeah.
is, not everybody does that, which is awesome.
Yeah. Like, in the most basic sense, if you're talking about, you know, business, like what it means to start a business. All a business is some sort of value exchange,
Mhm.
and in this case, money, for helping solve a problem, for, the helping a consumer solve a particular problem. And it's, a value exchange of money and goods, or money and education, money and services, whatever it is. But without, people come to me for kind of business advice for wanting to branch off and start a business. And, specifically for nursing professionals, if you can identify a pain point, whether it is of a patient, of another nurse, of another business, that you can solve, you can create a business around it.
Yeah.
It's just, and that's where the marketing comes in, and, the business building. If you know that you can solve that pain point, and solving that pain point fixes, a big problem, or provides a luxury.
Yes.
um, one of my business mentors describes products and services either as a vitamin, or did you say a vitamin, or a painkiller. So, like,
Ah,
businesses offerings.
interesting.
Yeah, so either like a product or a service, whatever it is, it's either a vitamin or it's either a painkiller, meaning that it fixes a problem that you have, that would be the painkiller, or it provides kind of like an extra luxury type of
Mhm.
experience. It's something that you want versus something
Mhm.
that you need. And so I think that if, as an individual, you can identify, or you can provide something of value in one of those other categories, and you can validate that, meaning you can kind of get a first group of people to give you that value exchange for the thing that you're offering, then you have a business. And then you
Yeah.
just have to learn all the business stuff
Well, and
to make
yeah,
it, sustainable.
and there are tons of coaches for that. I think it's so interesting. And I this one group that I run now, we talk about some similar stuff. We talk about like, CVs and resumes and, the differences in networking and LinkedIn and optimizing all that stuff, as like a full package. But one of the bonus, content sessions that I put in there, which is so intriguing to so many, is about side hustles. And we
Mm,
talk about like, 10 different side hustles. And I have like a list of, I mean, you could come up with 50 side hustles. I
sure.
chose 10 that I share with people that I think are, interesting. And it's always this like light bulb goes off of being like, oh, I mean, you can almost see it. And with my clients, like, oh, I didn't, it's like a mindset shift. Like, I didn't even know that was an option, I
Hmm.
didn't know I could take it. And sometimes when, I think too about my own experience and how, like you saw a problem, you saw a pain point or an issue that others were having, and you said, oh, I can provide a solution to that. And I think about the minute I had my light bulb moment was when I was sitting in an entrepreneurship class. It was called Living the Good Life. And I was like, because I saw it on, my electives list for my MBA program. I was like, I'll take that class. That sounds great, So, but I was sitting in there and I was listening to this life coach, Julie Riesler, who has become kind of a friend, and she's an inspiration to me. But she was talking about how she had started this business, and I'll never forget sitting there and thinking, I could do this. Like I could do this.
Mm,
I know what it means to have an exchange of providing value to patients and having an exchange, right? Patients come to me with a concern or pregnancy, and I catch a baby and submit a bill. Like I was familiar with that. And I'll never forget sitting there and thinking, oh, like I have had some issues trying to figure this whole thing out, and I've found some solutions for myself that have worked really well. And there's no doubt that those would probably be applicable to other people. Like other people would find value in that. And so sometimes some of my clients get a little bit in that headspace, like, but I don't know what they want because they don't see, right, the Facebook post of like,
mm,
they don't capitalize on, oh, like that's an issue other people are having and I can provide a solution. I tell them like, well, like what about writing like doing a course on how to be a really great church nurse? Like what is some skill that you have had to overcome that you personally have figured out how to do? And I'm as RNs, APRNs, as moms, what working parents, like you've found something that you've done that's made it easier, and there's no doubt in my mind that you could teach someone,
right.
just like we nurses do all the time in our profession, teach them how to do it. And I just remember being like, oh,
Mhm.
I made changes in my life. They were really, really big for me. I can help other people do that. And that's like literally how I got started. Um, and it's just that interesting, kind of, I feel like that light bulb aha moment to say, oh, okay.
Yeah. It's
There's,
like you need to
there's
be given permission that you can provide value in another way. Uh,
Yes, like your value isn't, I mean, it was interesting. I just saw a video the other day about like the difference between value and worth, like
mm,
we're worthy. You're always worthy.
yep.
Always, every bit of you is a worthy, you are worthy from the moment that you were born until the moment that you die. You have worth
Yep.
always. And we can create value, and we can create an exchange of, dollars for a service. And that, but yeah, it's that whole piece of thinking, oh, I could do this in a way that not only I like to do and I think is interesting and it's been helpful to me, and it's a way that I can make some money. And
Right.
oh, I can take that and I can make some bigger money. And oh, I don't have to sacrifice my family and being a mean mom, which I was sometimes because, I'm tired and all that. And it's just it's a huge shift in just, you
Yeah.
know,
I think that our profession in particular, to talk about worthiness, it kind of ties our worth to our productivity. Sometimes literally, especially for APRNs who are like actually compensated more based on how productive you are. And so I think it's a really dangerous place that we tend to get into as professionals, that our worth is defined by our productivity. And that's a long conversation for probably another time. But I think it's a really important point to make that I try to make to the new NPs that I'm counseling and kind of mentoring, that when we discuss productivity pay and what you should be negotiating in a contract and that whole side of things, like, I preface the conversation by, listen, please remember that your worth is not defined by your productivity. Your salary may be,
Yes.
um, but do not tie that to your worth and your identity as a person, because that is very, very dangerous territory.
Yeah, no, and I think too, once you get into some of the, comp plans that are based on productivity and, we see that people are incentivized to do more and to, and RVUs just become the focus. How many RVUs did you have? Did you meet benchmark? Are you at the 90th percentile? Do you bonus based off of your RVUs? And it just is, I don't know. I get like annoyed with it because I think in the profession of women's health, that has a direct outcome on birth, and it has direct
Sure.
outcome on sections and what we do.
Hmm.
And we could, and there may be others who argue with me, but you don't have to look for many examples within the world of healthcare, whether it's cardiology or it's stent placement, to know
Sure.
that, people who are incentivized to do more,
Yeah.
and it's not always at the best, with the best outcomes for patients in mind. Yeah, that's a whole, yeah. We'll do that on our next one.
I know. Yeah. If you're watching or listening, leave us a comment or a review about whether you think that we should talk about
Yeah.
productivity and worthiness and incentivized care for
Yeah.
healthcare providers. I think that'd be a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a full of stuff. Mindset, shame, guilt, all like, I mean, that's a whole like brutal for sure. So yeah, good.
Well, to wrap things up a little bit, where can people connect with you and find you?
So I'm too on Facebook, just like you are. I have a website, www.annconkleycnm, and that's Conkley with a K. .com. And so that's the best place. But my Instagram feed is always, I love Instagram. It's my favorite social media.
Me too. Me
Those
too.
two, yeah. So I put a good amount up on Instagram, and then also present though on Facebook, and I usually have a course kind of that I'm designing or figuring out, that's available. So,
Awesome.
what about
Me,
you?
me too. Same thing. I'm everywhere at the ResumeRx. So the ResumeRx.com and at the ResumeRx on Instagram. And yeah, browse my website, send me a DM. I like to connect with people in my DMs on Instagram. It's my favorite pastime. So
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good. I know I've made a lot of connections on Instagram. Actually,
yeah,
it's always it's a great little
it's
vehicle.
a good community. Yeah.
Yes, it's a good community for sure. So it was such a pleasure
Awesome.
to talk with you.
Yes, likewise.
Such a nice, we've had a conversation or two before, and it's so nice to I don't know, like have a conversation with another
Yes.
APRN mom. So
Yes, we'll do it again.
that's very good. Very good. All right.